The woman in the mud was dying, and Caleb Hayes knew he should keep writing. Blood soaked through her dress, dark against pale fabric that had no business being out here in the first place. Her eyes found his, sharp, desperate, nothing like the glassy stare of the other bodies scattered around the burning wagon. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was demanding survival. Caleb had buried enough people. He'd sworn he was done saving anyone. But something in that look made him dismount anyway, made him reach down into the carnage one more time, made him wonder if this decision would be the one that finally killed him too. If you want to see how far a person can fall before they find solid ground, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Valley didn't forgive mistakes. Caleb Hayes understood that better than most. He'd learned it the hard way, the kind of way that left scars on the inside where nobody could see them, but you felt them every damn day. The land out here didn't care about your intentions or your prayers or how hard you worked. It took what it wanted and left you with what was left. Which was why he almost didn't stop when he saw the smoke. Black column rising straight up in the still morning air, maybe 3 miles off the trail he'd been following back from town. His horse, a gray gelding named Ash, felt the hesitation in his hands and slowed without being asked. Caleb sat there for a long moment, jaw tight, weighing options that all felt bad. Smoke meant trouble. Out here, it always did. Could be a campfire, could be lightning strike, could be raid. None of those things were his problem anymore. He'd gone into Ridgefield for supplies, that was all. Flour, salt, ammunition, lamp oil. The basics that kept a man alive when he lived alone 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. He'd spoken to exactly 3 people, the store clerk, the blacksmith, and a drunk who'd tried to bum tobacco off him outside the saloon. He'd kept his head down, paid in cash, and loaded his saddlebags without lingering. That was the routine. That was the life he'd built after everything fell apart. The smoke kept rising. Not our business, Caleb said aloud. Ash flicked an ear back, waiting. Caleb pulled his hat lower, nudged the horse forward, kept his eyes on the trail. He made it maybe 20 yards before he stopped again. The thing was, he knew this country. Knew it the way you know the rooms of a house you've lived in for years, even in the dark. That smoke was coming from near Widow's Creek, which meant it was close to the old freight road that ran north toward the mining camps. Wagons used that route. Families used that route. Damn it! He turned Ash toward the smoke. The smell hit him first. Burning wood, burning canvas, and underneath it something else. Something organic and wrong. Caleb's gut tightened. He'd smelled that before. Gettysburg. Shiloh. 6 smaller skirmishes that didn't make it into any history books but left just as many dead. He approached slowly, eyes scanning the ridgeline, the scrub brush, anywhere a man with a rifle could hide. The trail opened up into a clearing near the creek, and there it was. Wagon on its side, wheels still smoldering, canvas top mostly burned away. 2 horses dead in the traces, throats cut. Boxes and trunks scattered like someone had torn through them looking for something specific. And bodies. Caleb counted 4. No, 5. Hard to tell with the way they'd fallen. He dismounted, rifle in hand, and moved through the scene with the careful steps of someone who'd walked through plenty of killing fields. 2 men, both armed, both shot in the back. Running, probably. A woman, older, face down near the wagon tongue. Another woman, younger, half covered by a trunk that had spilled open. And farther out, near the creek, he saw the hand first. Pale fingers pressed into dark mud, nails broken, still moving. Caleb crossed the distance in 4 strides and dropped to one knee. She was maybe 25, maybe younger. Hard to tell under the blood and dirt. Her dress had been expensive once. Dark green silk, fitted bodice, the kind of thing you saw in daguerreotypes from back east. Now it was torn at the shoulder and soaked through with blood from a wound high on her left side, just below the collarbone. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and her eyes locked onto his face with an intensity that made him rock back on his heels. "Don't," she whispered, voice raw, barely there. "Don't leave." "Easy." Caleb set the rifle down, pulled his canteen. "I'm not going anywhere yet." He got water to her lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but she swallowed some. Her hand came up, weak, shaking, and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "They'll come back," she said. "Looking." "Who will?" She didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back, and for a second he thought he'd lost her. But then she focused again, fighting her way back to consciousness through sheer stubborn will. "Can you move?" Caleb asked. "Don't know. Gonna find out." He got his arms under her shoulders and knees, lifted her as carefully as he could. She made a sound, not quite a scream, more like all the air leaving her lungs at once, and went rigid against the pain. Blood seeped faster from the wound. Through and through, he thought. Bullet had gone clean through, which was good and bad. Good because nothing was still in there. Bad because she was bleeding from both sides. "Stay with me," he said, carrying her toward Ash. "You got a name?" "Lena." Barely audible. "I'm Caleb. You're going to be all right, Lena. Hear me?" She didn't answer. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and her breathing went quieter. Not good. He needed to move fast. Getting her onto the horse was a nightmare. Ash was steady, thank Christ. Didn't spook when Caleb hauled the woman up and across the saddle. He tied her in place with rope from his pack, making sure she wouldn't slide off, then mounted behind her and turned back toward home. He didn't look at these other bodies. Didn't stop to bury them or say words over them. There'd been a time when he would have. That time was gone. The ride back took 3 hours. Lena drifted in and out, sometimes mumbling things he couldn't understand, sometimes going so still he had to check if she was still breathing. The sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down and flies started gathering around the blood on her dress. Caleb's cabin sat in a narrow fold of land between two ridges, hidden from the main trail by a stand of cottonwoods and a dry wash that only ran during spring melt. He'd chosen the spot for exactly that reason. You couldn't see it unless you knew it was there. One room, stone chimney, roof that leaked in 2 places he kept meaning to fix. Corral out back for Ash and the 2 mules he used for plowing. A vegetable patch that was more optimism than production. A grave under the oak tree on the east side. He didn't look at the grave as he rode past. Inside, he cleared the table with one sweep of his arm, sending tin plates and a half-finished letter scattering to the floor. He untied Lena and lifted her down, laid her out flat. Her face was chalk white now, lips going blue at the edges. "Come on," he said, more to himself than to her. "Don't quit on me yet." He'd done field medicine during the war, enough to know what he was looking at. The entry wound was high and to the left, missed the lung by maybe 2 inches. Exit wound was bigger, messier, but not catastrophic. The bleeding had slowed some during the ride, which meant her body was trying to clot. Good sign. He built up the fire, set water to boil, and pulled out the whiskey he kept for exactly this kind of situation. Then he cut her dress away from the wounds, trying not to think about the fact that he was undressing a woman he'd met an hour ago while she was unconscious. No choice. Modesty didn't stop bullets. The wounds were dirty. Mud, fabric, dried blood. He cleaned them with boiled water and whiskey, working as gently as he could. She came to halfway through and screamed, back arching off the table, hands scrabbling for purchase. He had to pin her shoulders down. "I know," he said. "I know it hurts. Almost done." "Stop," she gasped. "Please." "Can't stop. You'll die if I stop." She fought him for another few seconds, then went limp. Tears ran down into her hair. Her jaw was clenched so hard he could see the muscles jumping. He finished cleaning the wounds, packed them with clean cloth, and wrapped her torso in bandages he'd boiled and dried. His hands were steadier than he expected. Muscle memory from a life he'd left behind. When it was done, he stood back and looked at her. She was breathing easier now, some color coming back to her face. Not much, but some. He carried her to his bed, the only bed, and laid her down, pulled a blanket over her. Then he went outside, sat on the porch step, and let himself shake. It had been 4 years since he'd touched another person for longer than a handshake. 4 years since he'd let himself care whether someone lived or died. He'd built this life specifically to avoid moments like this. Moments where someone else's survival depended on him making the right choices. And here he was anyway. Ash nickered from the corral. Caleb stood, walked over, and started unsaddling the horse. His hands went through the familiar motions while his mind spun in circles. The massacre, the burned wagon, Lena's warning that they'd come back looking. Who were they? What had they wanted? And why had they left her alive? That last question bothered him most. In his experience, people who killed 4 others and burned a wagon didn't usually leave witnesses by accident. He finished with Ash, checked the mules, then went to the pump and washed the blood off his hands. The water ran pink, then clear. Inside, Lena hadn't moved. He checked her pulse, steady, and her forehead, warm but not fevered yet. He'd done what he could. Now it was up to her body to decide if it wanted to keep fighting. Caleb pulled a chair over next to the bed and sat down with his rifle across his knees. If someone came looking for her, they'd have to come through him first. He didn't sleep. The first night passed in silence. Lena's breathing was the only sound besides the wind outside and the occasional crack from the fire. Caleb kept the rifle close and his ears open, but nobody came. By morning, she was fevered. He'd expected it, but that didn't make it easier. Her skin burned to the touch, and she started talking in her sleep, full sentences that didn't connect to anything. Names he didn't recognize, places he'd never heard of. Sometimes she spoke in English, sometimes in what sounded like French. Her accent was educated, East Coast money, the kind of polish you didn't get growing up out here. He cooled her down with wet cloths and got water into her whenever she was conscious enough to swallow. Changed the bandages twice a day. Watched for signs of infection. On the third day, the fever broke. He was outside chopping wood when he heard the crash. He dropped the axe and ran, hit the door with his shoulder, rifle up. Lena was on the floor next to the bed, tangled in the blanket, eyes wide with panic. She'd tried to stand and her legs had given out. "Easy," Caleb said, lowering the rifle. "You're safe." She stared at him like she'd never seen him before. "Where?" "My cabin, 15 miles south of Ridgefield." "How did I—" "Found you at Widow's Creek 3 days ago. You were shot." Her hand went to her shoulder, felt the bandages under the shirt he'd dressed her in. One of his own shirts, too big for her, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Understanding crossed her face, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. "The others," she said. Caleb shook his head. She closed her eyes, took a breath that hitched in the middle. When she opened them again, the fear was locked away somewhere he couldn't see it. "I need to leave," she said. You can't walk." "I'll manage." "You'll die." She glared at him. "That's not your concern." "It is while you're bleeding on my floor." They stared at each other. Caleb noticed things he'd been too busy to notice before. The way she held herself, even sitting in a heap on the floor, back straight, chin up. The fine bones of her hands, the careful way she spoke despite the situation. This was someone who'd been taught how to carry herself, how to present a certain image to the world. "Who's looking for you?" he asked. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. At the creek, you said they'd come back." "Who's they?" Lena looked away. "It doesn't matter." "It might if they show up here with guns." "Then you should let me go before that happens." Caleb let out a breath through his nose. "Can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I pulled a bullet out of you, which means I got a stake in whether you live or die now. That's just how it works." "I didn't ask you to save me." "No," he agreed. "You demanded it. There's a difference." She blinked. For a second, something almost like surprise crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cool mask. "Help me up," she said. He got her back into bed. She didn't thank him, just lay there staring at the ceiling, jaw tight, breathing carefully through what had to be significant pain. "What's your real name?" Caleb asked. "I told you, Lena." "That the name you were born with?" She turned her head to look at him. "Does it matter?" "Might. It's the name I'm using now. That's all you need to know." Fair enough, he thought. Everyone out here was running from something. He wasn't about to judge. "I'll make soup," he said. He left her alone and went to work on something simple. Beans, salt pork, an onion he'd been saving. The kind of thing that would build strength without asking too much of a healing body. While it cooked, he sat at the table and cleaned his rifle. Old habit, kept his hands busy while his mind worked. The pieces didn't fit. 5 people dead, 1 survivor. Wagon ransacked, but not completely cleaned out. He'd seen jewelry on one of the bodies, a pocket watch on one of the men. If it was robbery, they'd done a piss-poor job of it. If it was something else, what? And Lena. Everything about her screamed money and breeding, but she was out here in the middle of nowhere, traveling with people who were clearly guarding her, running from something or toward something. He'd find out eventually. People always talked if you waited long enough. And they had time. She wasn't going anywhere until she could walk without falling over. Over the next week, a routine established itself. Caleb would wake before dawn, check Lena's wounds, change the bandages if needed. She'd watch him work with that same guarded expression, never quite relaxed, never quite letting down her guard. He'd make coffee, bring her some, then go outside to work, feeding the animals, repairing fence line, clearing brush, whatever needed doing. She slept a lot at first, her body rebuilding itself from the inside out. By the 5th day, she was staying awake longer, sitting up without help, asking for things instead of just accepting what he brought. By the 8th day, she was arguing with him. "You can't keep me in bed like an invalid," she said when he tried to stop her from standing. "You're not an invalid. You're recovering from a gunshot wound. I'm well enough to move around. You fell over yesterday trying to walk to the window." That was yesterday. She stood to prove her point, made it 3 steps before she swayed and had to grab the bedpost. Caleb caught her elbow. "Stubborn," he muttered. "Practical," she shot back, but she let him help her back to bed. The arguments became part of the routine. She'd push, he'd push back. They'd reach some kind of standoff that neither of them won. It was almost comfortable after a while. Better than the silence, anyway. He started to notice small things. The way she watched him work, studying his movements like she was trying to figure something out. The way she flinched at sudden noises, a door closing, the crack of splitting wood. The way she'd go completely still sometimes, staring at nothing, somewhere else entirely. Trauma, he recognized. He'd seen enough of it to know what it looked like. Hell, he saw it in the mirror every morning. On the 10th day, she asked about the grave. They were outside. He'd helped her to the porch so she could sit in the sun for a while, build up some strength. She'd been quiet for a long stretch, just watching the wind move through the grass, and then she said it. "Who's buried under the oak tree?" Caleb's hands stopped moving. He'd been whittling a new handle for a rake, and the knife just froze halfway through a cut. "Family," he said after a moment. "I'm sorry." He started whittling again. "Long time ago." "Doesn't make it easier." No, he thought. It really doesn't. She didn't ask for details. He appreciated that. After a minute, she changed the subject. "You were a soldier." Not a question. Caleb glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you move. The way you listen to everything even when you're focused on something else. And the field medicine." She gestured at her shoulder. "Most men out here know how to treat a cut or set a bone. What you did was different. Professional." "Army surgeon taught me," Caleb said, "during the war. Figured it was good knowledge to have." "Which side?" "Does it matter?" "No." She paused. "I suppose it doesn't." They sat in silence. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Somewhere down the valley, a coyote yipped. "Why'd you bring me here?" Lena asked. "Instead of taking me to town." Caleb considered the question. "Closer," he said finally. "And you needed help fast." "But you could have left me. Nobody would have known." "I would have known." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, crueler. Men out here usually are." "Some are," Caleb agreed. "Not all." "No," she said quietly. "Not all." The weather turned on the 12th day. Storm rolled in from the west, turning the sky the color of old bruises. Caleb got the animals secured and brought in extra wood for the fire. Lena watched from the window, arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. "You afraid of storms?" he asked. "No." But she didn't move from the window. The rain started just after dark. Not a gentle rain, the kind that came down sideways, rattling against the shutters, turning the dry wash into a river in minutes. Wind howled around the cabin, finding every gap in the walls. Caleb built up the fire and lit the lamps, made coffee and sat at the table working on mending a bridle. Lena stayed by the window. "You should rest," he said. "I'm fine." Lightning flashed, turning the room white for a second. Thunder followed close enough to shake the plates on their shelf. Lena jerked like she'd been slapped. Caleb stood. "Come sit." "I said I'm fine." "Lena." She turned. In the lamplight, he could see she was shaking, not from cold, from something else. "It was raining," she said. When it happened, I can't." "I know." He crossed the room, slow, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. "Come on." He guided her to the chair, sat her down, poured coffee, and put the cup in her hands. She held it like an anchor. "Talk," he said. "Sometimes that helps." "I can't." "Then don't. Just sit." So they sat. The storm raged outside, the fire crackled. Slowly, degree by degree, Lena stopped shaking. "They were good people," she said eventually, voice barely audible over the rain. "The ones in the wagon, they didn't deserve what happened. No one deserves that. They were helping me. If they hadn't, not your fault. You don't know that." "Yes," Caleb said. "I do." She looked at him. "How?" "Because I've been where you are. Blaming myself for things I couldn't control. Doesn't change anything. Just eats you alive from the inside." "What did you do to stop it?" "Still working on that part." The honesty seemed to surprise her. She took a sip of coffee, grimaced. "This is terrible." "Yeah." "You make it too strong." "Yeah." A sound that might have been a laugh caught in her throat. Not quite, but close. Progress. The storm blew itself out by morning. Caleb woke to silence and gray light filtering through the shutters. He'd fallen asleep in the chair. Lena was in bed, curled on her side, actually sleeping instead of just lying there pretending. He stood quietly, checked the fire, added wood. His back ached from the chair, but he'd slept in worse places. Outside, the world was washed clean. Water dripped from the eaves, and the air smelled like wet earth and sage. The days started to blur together. Lena got stronger, started helping with small things, folding laundry, shelling beans, stirring soup. She moved carefully, favoring her injured side, but she moved. The color came back to her face. The shadows under her eyes faded some. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them changed, became less tense, almost comfortable. Caleb caught himself watching her sometimes, the way she'd tuck hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the way she'd stand on the porch in the morning with her coffee, face turned toward the sun, the way she'd laugh, small and surprised, when one of the mules did something particularly stubborn. It made him nervous. Caring about someone meant they could hurt you. He'd learned that lesson, wasn't interested in learning it again. But it kept happening anyway. On the 18th day, everything changed. Caleb had ridden into Ridgefield for supplies, not because he needed them yet, but because he was starting to feel too comfortable with Lena around, and that scared him enough to make him want space. He told her he'd be back by evening, made sure she had water and food, and left before the sun was fully up. The ride gave him time to think, which was the problem. He didn't want to think about what happened after Lena was fully healed, where she'd go, whether she'd tell him the truth about who she was running from, whether he'd try to stop her from leaving. That last thought was the one that worried him most. He was so deep in his own head that he almost missed it. The man was standing outside the general store talking to the clerk. Well-dressed, too clean for someone who'd spent time on the trail. He had papers in his hand, and he was showing them to anyone who'd look. Caleb tied Ash to the rail and moved closer, trying to look casual. He caught part of the conversation. Young woman, dark hair, traveling north from Denver. May have been injured. The clerk shook his head. Haven't seen anyone like that. If you do, there's a reward. She's valuable property, you understand? Her family wants her back safely. Property. The word hit Caleb like a fist. He knew what it meant. Out here, property meant one of two things, a criminal or a woman sold into marriage. The man moved on to the next person. Caleb stood very still, mind racing. He bought his supplies quickly, kept his hat low, didn't make conversation. As he was leaving, he saw the man posting a notice on the wall outside the saloon. He waited until the man was gone, then walked over to read it. Reward. For information leading to the recovery of Miss Eliza Whitmore, age 23, recently disappeared from a contracted arrangement. Dark hair, green eyes, approximately 5 feet 4 inches. Last seen traveling north from Denver in the company of hired escorts. Presumed injured in recent incident near Widow's Creek. Contact Victor Hale, Hale Ranch, or Sheriff's Office in Ridgefield. $500 reward. Below the text was a photograph. It was Lena. Caleb tore the notice down, shoved it in his pocket, and rode hard for home. Ash knew something was wrong before they reached the cabin. The horse's ears kept swiveling back, catching Caleb's tension, and his gait stayed choppy even when the trail smoothed out. Caleb didn't ease up on the reins. The folded notice in his pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. Eliza Whitmore. Contracted arrangement. Valuable property. The words kept cycling through his head, each pass making his jaw tighter. He'd seen plenty of mail-order bride situations go bad. Knew women who'd signed contracts to escape worse situations back east, only to find themselves trapped in different kinds of hell out here. But something about this felt worse. The photograph had been professional, expensive. The reward was serious money, and the phrase valuable property sat in his gut like spoiled meat. The sun was dropping toward the western ridge when he finally saw the cabin. Smoke rising from the chimney. Everything looked normal from the outside, but Caleb's hand moved to the rifle anyway as he dismounted. Lena was at the stove when he came through the door. She turned, started to smile, then saw his face and went still. What happened? Caleb pulled the notice from his pocket and laid it on the table without a word. She crossed the room slowly, like she was walking toward something that might bite. When she saw the photograph, all the color drained from her face. Her hand came up to her mouth. "How long have they been looking?" Caleb asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She didn't answer, just stared at the paper. "Lena, or should I call you Eliza?" "Don't." The word was barely a whisper. "Don't what?" "Use your real name." "That's not my name anymore." The law might disagree. She looked up at him then, and the expression on her face made him take a step back. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, harder. Rage buried so deep it had turned to stone. "I don't care what the law says." "Well, you better start caring, because there's a man in Ridgefield showing that picture to everyone who'll look, asking questions, offering money." Caleb kept his voice level, but barely. "You want to tell me what the hell kind of trouble you brought to my door?" "I didn't bring anything. I didn't ask you to—" "You're right. You didn't ask. But I did it anyway. And now I'm standing here trying to figure out if someone's going to show up with a legal contract and a gun." Lena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, knuckles white. "His name is Victor Hale. He owns half the territory between here and Denver. Cattle, land, politicians. My father owed him money. A lot of money." She stopped, swallowed hard. "So he sold me to clear the debt." The words dropped into the room like stones into water. Caleb felt something in his chest tighten. "He sold you." "Signed a contract, legal and binding, according to 3 lawyers and a judge who all happened to be on Victor's payroll." Her voice was brittle, each word carefully controlled. "I was supposed to marry him, become Mrs. Victor Hale, live in his house, run his social events, produce his children, and never ask questions about where his money comes from or what he does to people who cross him." "You ran." "I ran." She looked down at the notice again. "The people in the wagon, they were helping me get north, to Montana, where I have an aunt. We thought if we could make it across the border, maybe the contract wouldn't follow, or maybe Victor would just cut his losses." A bitter sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Stupid." "What happened at Widow's Creek?" "I don't know. We were 3 days out from Denver when they hit us. 4 men on horseback came out of nowhere, started shooting before anyone could even reach for a weapon." Her voice went flat, distant. "Daniel tried to fight back. He was the wagon driver, used to be a soldier. They shot him in the back while he was running for cover. Then Marie, she tried to help me hide, and they—" She stopped, closed her eyes. Caleb saw her throat work. "I crawled into the brush," she continued after a moment. "There was so much noise, screaming and gunfire and the horses, and then it went quiet. I heard them going through the wagon, talking about whether they'd found me or not. One of them said to burn it all, make sure. They must have thought I was inside when they lit the fire. By the time I came out, they were gone." Caleb let the silence sit for a minute. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. "Victor sent them," he said. "Probably, or someone he hired. I don't think he'd do it himself. Too messy." She looked up. "You should take me to town, collect the reward. $500 is more money than you'll see in a year out here." "That what you think I'm going to do?" "I think you're a smart man who knows how to survive, and turning me in is the smart choice." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down hard. His mind was working through scenarios, none of them good. If Victor Hale was as connected as Lena said, then the law would side with him. Contract was a contract, especially when the man holding it owned the judge. But if Caleb turned her over, he'd be sending her back to a man who'd already killed 4 people to get her. That wasn't happening. How long before he traces you here, he asked. I don't know. Days, maybe. The man you saw in town, he'll ask around. Someone will mention seeing you ride out alone, coming back with supplies. Eventually, someone will remember that Hayes fellow who lives out past Copper Ridge, keeps to himself. She wrapped her arms around herself. I'll leave tonight. You can tell them you never saw me. And go where? You can barely walk 5 miles. I'll manage. You'll die. Better than the alternative. Caleb stood, walked to the window. The light was going red gold, shadows stretching long across the valley. He'd built this place to be invisible, to be forgotten. He'd worked hard to make sure nobody had a reason to come looking for Caleb Hayes. And now here was a reason walking right through his door, wearing a green dress and carrying more trouble than any one person should be able to hold. He should let her go, should give her supplies and a head start and wash his hands of the whole thing. That was the smart play. But when he turned around, he saw the way she was standing, back straight even though she was terrified, chin up even though she was shaking, the same way she'd looked lying in the mud at Widow's Creek, demanding to live. You're not leaving, he said. Caleb, not until you're healed enough to have a real chance out there. Another week, maybe 2. We'll figure something out. There's nothing to figure out. He has a legal contract and enough money to make any problem disappear. There's no fighting that. Maybe not, but running half dead into the wilderness isn't fighting either. It's just dying slower. She stared at him. Why are you doing this? Already told you. I got a stake in whether you live or die. That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got. They stood there on opposite sides of the room, neither one backing down. Finally, Lena looked away. 1 week, she said, then I'm gone, whether you like it or not. Fine. I mean it. I believe you. He didn't, and he was pretty sure she knew he didn't, but it was enough to end the conversation, so they both let it drop. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Caleb kept up his routines, feeding animals, checking fence lines, splitting wood. But now every sound made him look up. Every distant dust cloud got studied until he was sure it wasn't riders. He started carrying the rifle everywhere, even just to the pump. Lena noticed. She didn't say anything, but he'd catch her watching him sometimes with an expression he couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe. Or calculation. He wasn't sure which worried him more. She pushed herself harder now. Walked the perimeter of the cabin every morning, going a little farther each day. Did exercises to build back strength in her shoulder. Caleb had seen wounded soldiers do the same thing, preparing for the next fight even before the current wounds healed. On the 3rd day, she asked to learn how to shoot. They were outside. Caleb was resetting posts on the corral fence, and Lena was supposed to be resting in the shade. Instead, she'd wandered over to where he'd leaned the rifle against the wall. Show me how to use this, she said. Caleb looked up from the post hole. You ever fired a gun before? No. Probably best to keep it that way. I'm serious. If someone comes, I need to be able to defend myself. If someone comes, you get behind me and stay there. She crossed her arms. I'm not hiding behind anyone else. Not anymore. There was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and he was just now hearing it. Either way, he recognized the tone. He'd used it himself often enough. All right, he said, climbing out of the hole. But we do it my way. He started her on the basics. How to hold the rifle, how to shoulder it without the recoil knocking her down, how to breathe and squeeze instead of pulling the trigger. She listened with intense focus, asking questions when something didn't make sense, practicing the motions over and over until they were smooth. When he finally let her load around and aim at a tree stump 50 yards out, she missed by 3 feet. Harder than it looks, he said. Again, she fired 5 more rounds, missed 4 times, clipped the edge of the stump once. By the end, her hands were shaking from the effort and sweat was running down her face, but she didn't complain. Enough for today, Caleb said, taking the rifle. I need to practice more. You need to not tear open your shoulder. There's a difference. She wiped her face on her sleeve, frustrated. How long did it take you to learn? Couple years, but I had sergeants screaming at me and people shooting back, so that speeds things up. I don't have years. I know. They walked back to the cabin together. Lena was limping slightly, favoring her left side. She tried to hide it, But Caleb noticed. Noticed the way she'd wince when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she'd grip the door frame a little too hard when standing up. "You need to rest," he said. "I've been resting for 3 weeks. Your body's still healing." "My body doesn't get to decide the timeline anymore." That night, she had the dream again. Caleb woke to the sound of her crying out, words he couldn't understand. He was on his feet before he was fully conscious, hand reaching for the rifle. Then he heard it again and realized. He lit the lamp and crossed to the bed. Lena was tangled in the blanket, head thrashing back and forth, caught in whatever nightmare was playing behind her closed eyes. "Lena." He kept his voice low, non-threatening. "Wake up, you're dreaming." She didn't respond. Her breathing was fast, panicked, a sheen of sweat on her face. Caleb hesitated, then reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "Lena." Her eyes snapped open. For a second she didn't see him, saw something else, something that made her recoil with a sound like a wounded animal. Then recognition clicked in and she went still. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Nothing to apologize for. She sat up, pulling the blanket around herself even though the room was warm. Her hands were shaking again. Caleb fetched water, put the cup in her hands. "Same dream?" he asked. "Always the same." She drank. The wagon, the fire, Marie screaming. A pause. "I couldn't help her. She was 10 feet away and I just lay there in the brush and did nothing." "You would have died too." "Maybe that would have been better." "No," Caleb said firmly. "It wouldn't." Lena looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "You ever have dreams about your family?" The question hit him sideways. He hadn't expected it. "Yeah." "Do they get better? Over time?" He wanted to lie. Tell her it got easier, that the dreams faded, that eventually you could sleep through the night without waking up with your heart trying to punch through your ribs. But he'd never been good at lying. "No," he said. "They don't get better. You just get used to them." Something in her expression crumpled. She set the cup down and put her face in her hands. Her shoulders started shaking. Caleb stood there uselessly. He didn't know what to do with crying women. Hadn't known even before he'd lost the ability to comfort anyone. But he couldn't just walk away either. He sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to leave space between them. "Talk or don't talk. Your choice. But I'm here either way." For a long time she just cried. Quiet, wrenching sobs that she tried to muffle against her palms. Caleb sat and listened and felt completely inadequate. Finally, the crying tapered off into shaky breaths. Lena wiped her face with the blanket edge. "I thought I was strong enough," she said, voice hoarse. "When I decided to run, I told myself I could handle whatever came, that being free was worth any price. But I didn't know—" She stopped, started again. 4 people are dead because of me. 4 people are dead because someone murdered them. That's not on you. They were protecting me. That was their choice. You didn't pull the trigger. I might as well have." Caleb let out a breath. "You want to carry that guilt? I can't stop you, but I've been carrying my own version for 4 years, and I can tell you it doesn't change anything, doesn't bring them back, doesn't make you feel better, just makes you tired." She looked at him. "What happened to your family?" He should have seen this question coming, should have deflected, changed the subject, anything. But something about the hour and the darkness and the fact that she'd just laid herself bare made him answer. "Fever," he said. "Came through one winter. My wife and daughter both got sick. I rode for the doctor in Ridgefield, but by the time we got back..." His throat closed up. He had to force the rest out. They were gone, both of them. Sarah was 6. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered. "Yeah, me too." "Is that why you live out here alone?" "Part of it. Other part is I'm not much good to anyone anymore. Figured it was better to just..." He gestured vaguely at the cabin, the valley, the whole empty expanse of his life. "This? You saved me. Doesn't count. I didn't have time to think about it. Still counts." They sat in the lamplight, 2 damaged people who'd somehow ended up in the same broken place at the same broken time. Outside, a coyote called. Another answered from farther up the ridge. "You should try to sleep," Caleb said eventually. "I don't think I can." "Want me to stay?" She nodded. Didn't look at him when she did it, like she was embarrassed to need the company. Caleb understood that. He pulled the chair over, settled in with the rifle across his knees. "Thank you," Lena said quietly. "For what?" "Not leaving me alone." He didn't have an answer for that, so he just sat there while she lay back down, and eventually, impossibly, fell asleep. The man arrived 2 days later. Caleb was in the corral working with one of the mules when he heard hoofbeats. He looked up to see a single rider coming down the trail, moving at an easy pace, not hurried, confident. "Lena," he called toward the cabin. "Inside, now." She appeared in the doorway, saw the rider, and disappeared without argument. Good. Caleb set down the lead rope and walked toward the house, angling so he'd intercept the rider before he got too close. The man reined in about 20 yards out. He was maybe 40, well-fed, with the kind of clothes that cost more than Caleb's entire cabin. Black coat despite the heat, silk vest, boots polished to a mere shine. He sat his horse like someone who'd grown up in the saddle but hadn't worked a day in his life. "Mr. Hayes?" The man's voice was smooth, educated. East Coast money. "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Garrett. I'm an associate of Mr. Victor Hale. I believe you might be able to help me with a matter of some urgency." Caleb kept his face neutral. "Don't know any Victor Hale." "No? That's interesting, because I've been asking around Ridgefield and several people mentioned you rode out alone 3 weeks ago and came back the same day, right around the time a certain incident occurred near Widow's Creek." Garrett smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Now, I'm not accusing you of anything. Just wondering if perhaps you saw something that day. A woman, maybe. Injured. Dark hair. See lots of things out here. Most of them aren't my business." Of course. But this particular woman is very important to Mr. Hale. She's his fiancée, you understand. There was a terrible misunderstanding and she ran off before the wedding. Her family is very worried. We just want to make sure she's safe. Every word out of the man's mouth was slick as oil and just as toxic. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," he said. "You're certain? Because there's a substantial reward for information. $500. That's a lot of money for a man living alone out here." "Don't need money bad enough to take it from you." Something flickered in Garrett's expression. Annoyance, maybe. He reached into his coat. Caleb's hand moved toward his rifle and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a legal contract," Garrett said, holding it up. "Signed by Miss Whitmore's father and witnessed by a judge. It establishes Mr. Hale's legal claim to his bride. Anyone harboring her would be in violation of territorial law. That's a serious offense, Mr. Hayes. Could mean jail time, or worse. If I see her, I'll be sure to let you know." Garrett studied him for a long moment. "You're a hard man to read, Mr. Hayes, but let me be clear. Mr. Hale is not a patient man, and he's not accustomed to being told no. If you're protecting her, and I'm not saying you are, but if you were, you'd be making a very dangerous enemy. I'll keep that in mind." "Do that." Garrett gathered his reins. "I'll be staying at the hotel in Ridgefield for the next few days. If you remember seeing anything at all, you know where to find me." He turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Caleb stood and watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he let himself breathe. Lena was standing just inside the doorway when he went back to the cabin. "He knows," she said. "He suspects. Different thing. Not by much." She was pale, arms wrapped around herself. "You should have told him. Turned me over. Now he'll come back with men and guns and—" "Let him. You don't understand what Victor is capable of. Don't need to understand. Just need to be ready." He checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, started mentally cataloging the ammunition he had, the sight lines around the cabin, where someone would approach from if they came looking for a fight. "Caleb," Lena's voice was quiet. "I can't let you do this." Wasn't asking permission. "Why? Why are you risking everything for someone you barely know?" He looked at her, really looked at her, saw the woman who'd demanded to live even while bleeding out in the mud. The woman who'd stood on the porch, practicing how to walk again even when every step hurt. The woman who'd asked to learn how to shoot because she was done hiding. "Because someone should," he said. "And I'm here." Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. "I don't know how to repay that." "Didn't ask you to." They stood there in the silence. Outside, the afternoon was fading toward evening. The light coming through the window turned everything gold and amber, soft around the edges. "What do we do now?" Lena asked. "We wait, and we get ready." That night, they made a plan. It wasn't a good plan. Caleb knew that, but it was better than nothing. They went over escape routes, places Lena could hide if men came, signals they could use to communicate without words. He showed her where he kept the ammunition, the spare rifle, the supplies she'd need if she had to run. "You really think they'll come?" she asked. "Yeah, maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come." "And you're just going to fight them off alone?" "Done it before. When you were a soldier with an army behind you. This is different." "Not that different." She shook her head. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "I believe that." They worked until late, preparing as much as they could. When there was nothing left to do, Caleb sat on the porch and Lena joined him. They didn't talk, just sat and listened to the night sounds, crickets, distant coyotes, wind in the grass. "Tell me about your daughter," Lena said after a while. Caleb's first instinct was to say no, to keep that part of himself locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone. But something about the way she asked, quiet and genuine, made him answer. "She liked horses. Used to follow me around the corral trying to help with everything, even though she was too small to reach the stirrups." Had her mother's laugh. This big, joyful sound that didn't match her size at all. He paused. "She would have been 10 this year." "What was her name?" "Sarah." "That's beautiful." "Yeah." They sat with that for a minute. Then Lena said, "My mother died when I was 12, pneumonia. After that, it was just me and my father. He was never the same after she was gone. Started drinking, gambling, making bad decisions." Her voice went flat. "By the time I was 20, we'd lost everything. The house, the money, my dowry, everything. That's when Victor showed up with his offer. Your father should have told him to go to hell." "He should have, but he didn't. He saw a way out of his debts and he took it. Didn't matter that it meant selling his daughter like livestock. You could have said no." "Could I?" She looked at him. "I had no money, no prospects, no way to support myself. Women don't have a lot of options in that situation. You either marry or you starve. Those are the choices." "There's always choices," says the man who's never had to make them. Caleb couldn't argue with that. He'd seen enough during the war to know that people trapped between bad options and worse ones usually didn't have the luxury of high-minded principles. "I'm sorry," Lena said after a moment. "That wasn't fair." "Was a little fair." She surprised him by laughing. Actual laughter, not bitter or sarcastic. Just genuine amusement at the absurdity of everything. "We're a mess, aren't we?" she said. "Pretty much. And yet here we are, two broken people hiding in the middle of nowhere waiting for armed men to show up and drag me back to a man I'd rather die than marry." "You're not going back." "You keep saying that, like you can just decide it and make it true." "I can." She turned to look at him. In the moonlight, her face was all shadows and angles. "You can't save everyone, Caleb. Not trying to save everyone, just you." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb felt his pulse kick up, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the night made everything feel smaller and more intimate. Lena's expression shifted. Something complicated moved behind her eyes. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Care about me. It's dangerous." "Little late for that." "It's not." Her voice was urgent now. "You can still walk away. Tell Garrett you reconsidered, collect the reward, go back to your life. You don't owe me anything. Already told you what. I know what you told me, but I'm telling you now as clearly as I can. I'm not worth dying for. Do you understand? I'm not worth it." Caleb met her eyes. "That's not your call to make." They stared at each other. The space between them felt charged, electric with things neither of them was saying. Finally, Lena looked away. "You're impossible," she muttered. "Heard that before." She stood, wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. "I'm going to bed. Try not to do anything heroic while I'm sleeping. No promises." She went inside. Caleb stayed on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. Somewhere out there, Garrett was reporting back to Victor Hale. Plans were being made. Men were being hired. The storm was coming whether he was ready or not. But for tonight, for this moment, Lena was safe. That would have to be enough. The morning broke cold and clear, the kind of day that made the valley look peaceful if you didn't know better. Caleb had been awake since before dawn, watching the eastern ridge turn from black to gray to gold. He'd learned a long time ago that sleep was optional when you were waiting for trouble to find you. Lena was up early too. He heard her moving around inside, the creak of floorboards, the soft clatter of the coffee pot. When she came out to the porch, she had 2 cups in her hands and dark circles under her eyes that said she hadn't slept much either. "Anything?" she asked, handing him one. "Quiet." "That's not comforting." "Wasn't meant to be." They drank their coffee in silence. The valley was waking up around them, birds starting their morning racket, insects humming in the grass, one of the mules braying for breakfast. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Caleb didn't trust any of them. "I've been thinking," Lena said after a while, "about what happens if they come with the law." "They won't." "How do you know? How do you—" "Because Victor Hale doesn't want the law involved any more than you do. Legal contract or not, people start asking questions when 4 bodies turn up and a woman goes missing. Questions are bad for business, especially the kind of business he's in." "You sound certain." "Seen men like him before. During the war, after it. They operate in the gray spaces where nobody's looking too close. Bringing in the actual law defeats the purpose." Lena turned that over. "So he'll send hired men, people who don't care about the contract, just the money." "That'd be my guess." "How many?" "Depends how valuable you are to him. Could be 2, could be 10. Caleb finished his coffee, set the cup down. "Either way, we'll deal with it." "We." She said the word like she was testing its weight. "You keep saying we. Problem with that?" "Just trying to understand why you'd put yourself in the line of fire for this. For me." Caleb looked out into the valley. The sun was higher now, burning off the last of the morning mist. "Told you already. Someone should. That's not good enough." "It's what I've got." She studied his face, eyes narrowed like she was trying to see past the words to whatever he was keeping locked down. Finally, she shook her head. "You're a terrible liar, you know that?" "Never claimed otherwise." "There's something else, some reason you're doing this that you won't say." "Maybe I just don't like the idea of a woman getting dragged back to a man she's terrified of." "That's part of it, but not all." She was right, and they both knew it, but Caleb wasn't ready to examine too closely why he'd decided to make this his fight. Easier to keep moving, keep planning, keep his hands busy so his mind didn't wander into territory that might make him question what he was doing. "I need to ride into Ridgefield," he said, changing the subject. "See what I can find out." "That's insane. Garrett's there. If he sees you, he's already seen me, and right now he thinks I'm just another rancher who doesn't want to get involved. Better to keep it that way than let him think I'm avoiding town." "What if he follows you back?" "I'll make sure he doesn't." Lena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She was learning to pick her battles. "When?" "This afternoon. You'll stay here, keep the rifle close. Anyone comes who isn't me, you hide. Don't try to fight. Don't try to talk. Just hide." "I'm not hiding anymore. This isn't about courage. It's about strategy. You're no good to anyone dead." She didn't like it. He could see that in the set of her jaw, the way her hands tightened on the coffee cup. But she nodded. Progress. Caleb spent the next few hours preparing. He checked the ammunition supply, made sure there were enough water barrels filled, chopped extra wood, and stacked it by the door. Basic siege preparation, the kind of thing he'd done 100 times during the war. Lena watched him work without comment, but he could feel her tension building. When he finally saddled Ash and got ready to leave, she followed him to the corral. "How long will you be gone?" "Few hours. Be back before dark." "And if you're not?" "Then you take the gray mare, head north, and don't stop until you hit Montana." "Caleb, I mean it. Don't wait for me. Don't come looking. Just go." She grabbed his arm before he could mount. "Promise me you'll be careful." The touch surprised him. So did the look on her face, raw worry that she wasn't bothering to hide. He covered her hand with his own without thinking. "I'll be careful," he said. "I'm serious." "So am I." For a moment they stood there, hands connected, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. Then Lena pulled back, wrapped her arms around herself. "Go," she said. "Before I change my mind about letting you." The ride to Ridgefield took longer than usual. Caleb kept Ash to a steady walk, watching the trail behind and ahead, alert for anything out of place. The late summer heat pressed down like a weight, and grasshoppers exploded from the brush with every step. Normal country sounds. He still didn't trust them. Ridgefield hadn't changed in the 3 weeks since he'd last been there. Same dusty main street, same tired buildings leaning into each other like drunks propping each other up. The general store, the saloon, the livery, the hotel. A scattering of houses on the outskirts, maybe 200 people on a good day. Caleb tied Ash outside the saloon and went in. The bartender, a heavy man named Dutch who'd lost an arm at Antietam, looked up from washing glasses. "Hayes, been a while. Came in a few weeks back." "Yeah, but that was business. This looks social." "I'll have a whiskey." Dutch poured without comment. The saloon was nearly empty this time of day, just a couple of card players in the corner and an old man sleeping off last night's drunk at a table by the window. Caleb took his drink and leaned against the bar where he could watch the door. "Heard there's strangers in town," he said casually. Dutch snorted. "Stranger, singular, Eastern dandy staying at the hotel, asking questions about some missing woman. Got half the town stirred up with his reward money. Anyone taking him up on it?" "Not yet. Most folks don't know anything worth $500. Dutch gave him a sideways look. "You hear anything out your way?" "Quiet as usual." "Uh-huh." The bartender went back to his glasses. "Man came in here yesterday, showed me a photograph. Pretty girl. Looked scared in the picture, like whoever took it made her nervous." Caleb kept his face neutral. "That right?" Asked if I'd seen anyone matching the description. I told him we get all kinds passing through. Hard to remember one face. "Probably true." "Probably." Dutch set down a glass, picked up another. "Also told him that Hayes fellow out past Copper Ridge keeps to himself, doesn't truck with strangers, and generally minds his own business. Figured that was worth mentioning." Caleb looked at him. Dutch didn't look back, just kept washing glasses like they were having a conversation about the weather. "Appreciate it," Caleb said quietly. "Don't know what you're talking about. I'm just making conversation." The door opened and 3 men walked in. Not locals, Caleb could tell that immediately. They had that hired gun look, the way they moved and the way their eyes scanned the room before they committed to entering. The tallest one had a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. The shortest carried a pistol high on his hip, tied down. The third looked like he'd been in more fights than he'd won. They took a table near the back. The card players gathered up their money and left without being asked. "New arrivals," Caleb said, keeping his voice low. "Showed up this morning on the stage. Been asking around about work." Dutch's tone was carefully neutral. "Funny thing is, they don't look like they need work. Look like they already got it." Victor's men. Had to be. Caleb felt his gut tighten. He finished his whiskey, dropped coins on the bar. "Think I'll head over to the general store. Need some things." "Sure you do." Dutch gave him a meaningful look. "Watch yourself out there." Caleb nodded and left. As he crossed the street, he could feel eyes on his back. The hired guns weren't even trying to be subtle. Good. That meant they were confident, which meant they were probably sloppy. The general store was run by a woman named Margaret Ross, who'd buried 3 husbands and outlived all of them by sheer stubborn will. She was tallying receipts when Caleb walked in. "Mr. Hayes, twice in 1 month. Should I be worried?" "Just need some lamp oil." "Lamp oil." She looked at him over her spectacles. "That all?" "And information, if you're selling." Margaret set down her pencil. "Depends what you're buying with." "Courtesy, maybe a little discretion." "Those are currencies I accept." She came around the counter, moved to the window where she could see the saloon across the street. "Those men who just rode in, you know anything about them?" "Nothing good." "That's what I figured. They've been showing that photograph around, asking questions, making people nervous." She turned back to him. "I heard about the massacre at Widow's Creek. 5 people dead, wagon burned, and now strangers with guns asking about a missing woman. You think they're connected?" "I think coincidences are rare out here, and I think you rode into town 3 weeks ago and came back with blood on your saddle." Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his side where the rifle hung. Margaret noticed but didn't react. "I'm not accusing you of anything," she said, "just stating facts. What you do with those facts is your business. And if those men come asking you about me, I'll tell them you buy lamp oil and pay in cash, nothing else to tell." Appreciate that. Don't thank me yet. There's more. She glanced at the window again. That Eastern man, Garrett, he's been meeting with Sheriff Pike. Long meetings, behind closed doors. I don't know what they're discussing, but Pike came out of the last one looking like someone had offered him money he couldn't refuse. Pike's on the take? Pike's always been on the take. Question is, what's he being paid to do this time? Caleb felt the situation shifting beneath him. If the sheriff was involved, it meant this wasn't just about hired guns. It meant the law, or what passed for it in Ridgefield, was being turned into a weapon. How long do I have? He asked. That's the real question, isn't it? Margaret moved back to the counter, started wrapping the lamp oil in brown paper. If I were a gambling woman, I'd say maybe a day or two before they make their move. They're gathering information, building a case. Once they think they have enough, they'll come for you with badges and warrants and enough legal cover to make it stick. Legal cover for what? Harboring a fugitive, interfering with a lawful contract, maybe even conspiracy in the Wagon murders, if they want to get creative. She handed him the package. They're building a box to put you in, Mr. Hayes. Question is whether you're going to let them close the lid. Caleb took the oil, dropped coins on the counter. More than it was worth, but Margaret didn't comment on that. One more thing, she said as he turned to leave. That young woman they're looking for. If she exists, if someone was helping her, you'd tell her to be smart about this, wouldn't you? Tell her that running only works if you're faster than what's chasing you. If she existed, what would you tell her? Margaret smiled, thin and sharp. I'd tell her to stop running. Running just wears you down until you can't fight anymore. Better to stand your ground and make them come to you. Even if the odds are bad? Especially if the odds are bad. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules of the game. Caleb studied her. You speaking from experience? I didn't bury 3 husbands by accident, Mr. Hayes. He almost laughed. Would've, if the situation wasn't so serious. Instead, he tipped his hat. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. And Mr. Hayes, whatever you're planning, do it soon. The clock's running. He left before she could see how much her words had rattled him. Outside, the afternoon sun was slanting long across the street. The hired guns were coming out of the saloon, spreading out in 3 different directions. Looking, hunting. Caleb untied Ash and mounted up, keeping his movements casual. Just another rancher heading home after some business in town. Nothing to see here. But as he rode out, he felt eyes tracking him from multiple directions. They knew. Maybe not for certain, but enough to be watching. Enough to be planning. He took the long way back, circling wide through the hills to make sure no one was following. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was dropping toward the western ridge, and his nerves were stretched tight. Lena met him at the door, rifle in hand. She saw his face and went pale. What happened? They're coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, but soon. He told her everything. The hired guns, the sheriff, Garrett's meetings, Margaret's warning. Lena listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each detail. So we run, she said when he finished. We could, but they'd just follow. And next time we might not have warning. Then what? Caleb set the lamp oil on the table, pulled out a chair. Margaret said something that got me thinking. She said the only way to win is to change the rules. What does that mean? It means we stop playing their game. Stop reacting to what they do and start making them react to us. Lena sat down across from him. I'm listening. The contract you signed, you still have it? No, my father kept the original. Victor probably has it now. But you know what's in it. Every word. I read it 100 times trying to find a way out. Any loopholes? She laughed bitterly. It was written by Victor's lawyers. The only loopholes are the ones that benefit him. What are the terms? Exactly. Lena closed her eyes, reciting from memory. I, Eliza Marie Whitmore, do hereby agree to enter into lawful marriage with Victor Jonathan Hale within 30 days of signing this agreement. In exchange for this union, all debts owed by Marcus Whitmore to Victor Hale and associated business interests will be considered paid in full. Should I fail to fulfill this obligation, I forfeit any claim to property, inheritance, or family support, and Marcus Whitmore's debts will be reinstated with additional penalties. What about Victor's obligations? What? Contracts work both ways. What does he have to provide? Lena opened her eyes. I never thought about it like that. It just says he agrees to accept me as his lawful wife and provide appropriate housing and financial support. Does it say anything about consent? About the marriage having to happen a certain way? No, just that it has to happen within 30 days. She leaned forward. Why? What are you thinking? I'm thinking that contract makes you valuable to Victor because of what you represent. A wife, an asset, someone he can control. Caleb met her eyes. But what if you weren't available anymore? I don't understand. What if you were already married? The words dropped between them like a stone into still water. Lena stared at him. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious. If you're already married, the contract's void. He can't force you to marry him if you've got a husband. But I don't... She stopped. Understanding dawned across her face, followed immediately by shock. You're saying you would... It's just paper, a legal shield, nothing more. That's insane. Maybe, but it works. You'd tie yourself to me permanently just to spite Victor Hale? Wouldn't be permanent. Once the threat's gone, we could annul it. Happens all the time. Lena stood up, paced to the window. You haven't thought this through. If we do this, you'd be legally bound to a woman you barely know. Victor could come after you for interfering with his contract. The law would be on his side. The law's already on his side. This levels the field. It's too much. I can't ask you to eat. You're not asking. I'm offering. She turned to face him. Why? And don't tell me it's because someone should. I want the real reason. Caleb stood, crossed to where she was standing, close enough to see the rapid pulse in her throat, the way her hands were shaking even as she tried to look strong. Because I'm tired of watching people get crushed by men with power and money, he said. Because during the war, I saw enough injustice to last 10 lifetimes, and I swore if I ever got the chance to push back against it, I would. And because... He stopped, started again. Because you deserve better than being treated like property. And if this is how I can make sure that happens, then that's what I'm going to do. Lena's eyes were bright. You can't save everyone. Not trying to save everyone, just you. They stood facing each other in the dying light. Outside, the first stars were coming out. A coyote called from somewhere up the ridge. This is crazy, Lena whispered. Yeah, we barely know each other. True. It could make everything worse. Could make everything better. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. I must be as crazy as you are, because I'm actually considering this. So consider it. We'd need a preacher, a witness, legal documents. There's a circuit preacher who comes through Ridgefield once a month. He was there today. I saw his wagon outside the church. Victor would challenge it, say it was done under duress. Let him. By the time he gets a judge to hear the case, you'll be established as my wife. Hard to undo that without admitting he was trying to force you into an invalid marriage. Lena paced again, thinking it through. We'd have to do it tomorrow, before Garrett makes his move. First thing in the morning. And you're absolutely certain about this? Because once it's done, there's no taking it back. Not easily. Caleb thought about his life over the past 4 years. The isolation, the guilt, the slow erosion of everything that made him feel human. And he thought about the past few weeks with Lena in the cabin. The arguments, the silences, the moments when he'd felt something other than numbness. I'm certain, he said. She searched his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. All right, we'll do it. Yeah? Yeah, a shaky smile. I'm going to marry a man I met a month ago to escape marrying a man I've never met. My mother would be horrified. My mother would probably understand. Was she as crazy as you are? Crazier? This time the laugh was real, brief but real. It changed something in her face, made her look younger, less haunted. They spent the rest of the evening planning. They'd ride to Ridgefield at first light, find the preacher, get married before anyone knew what was happening. Margaret could be a witness. She'd do it, Caleb was certain. Then they'd come back to the cabin and wait. When Garrett and his men showed up with their warrants and their demands, they'd be met with a legal marriage and a woman who'd made her choice. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was better than running and better than fighting alone. As night fell, they sat on the porch like they had so many times before. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility and fear and something neither of them wanted to name. "What happens after?" Lena asked. "Assuming this works and Victor backs off, what then?" "Then you're free to go wherever you want. And you?" "I'll still be here. This is my home." She was quiet for a long time. "It's peaceful out here. I can see why you chose it." "Peaceful and lonely are close neighbors." "Yes." She looked at him. "They are." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things unsaid. Finally, Lena stood. "I should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be—" She gestured helplessly. "Yeah." "Caleb?" She paused in the doorway. "Thank you. For this. For everything. Thank me when it's over." "No, I'll thank you now, because whatever happens tomorrow, you gave me something I haven't had in a long time." "What's that?" "A choice." She went inside. Caleb stayed on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. Tomorrow they'd ride into town and do something that would either save Lena or destroy them both. He should probably be more worried about which outcome was more likely. But strangely, he wasn't. For the first time in 4 years, he felt like he was moving toward something instead of just away. Like he was choosing to fight instead of just surviving. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The night deepened around him. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in the valley, an owl called. Life continuing, indifferent to human drama and human plans. Caleb let his mind go quiet, listening to the wind and the insects and the small sounds of the night. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight, he'd keep watch. Inside the cabin, a lamp flickered on, then off. Lena trying to rest before the morning. He hoped she could sleep. One of them should. The hours passed slowly. Caleb's thoughts drifted between past and present, between the grave under the oak tree and the woman sleeping in his bed, between the life he'd built in isolation and the one he might be stepping into tomorrow. Just before dawn, he heard movement inside. Lena appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair pulled back and her face set with determination. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Didn't try." "Probably smart." She sat down beside him. "You know this is insane, right?" "You've mentioned that." "Just making sure we're both clear on what we're doing. We're giving you a way out. That's what we're doing." She nodded. "Okay, then let's go do something insane." They saddled both horses as the sky lightened from black to gray. Neither spoke much. There wasn't much left to say. By the time the sun broke over the eastern ridge, they were ready. Caleb took one last look at the cabin, the valley, the life he'd built in careful isolation. Then he mounted Ash and turned toward Ridgefield. Lena rode beside him, back straight, chin up. Not running anymore. Choosing. They rode into whatever came next together. The ride into Ridgefield felt longer than it was. Every shadow looked like a threat, every distant figure a potential enemy. Caleb kept his hand near his rifle and his eyes moving, but Lena rode steady beside him, her face set with the kind of determination that came from having nothing left to lose. They reached the edge of town just as the sun cleared the mountains. The street was mostly empty this early. A few shop owners sweeping porches, a dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight, smoke rising from the hotel chimney. Normal, peaceful. It wouldn't stay that way. "Where first?" Lena asked quietly. "Church. Get the preacher before anyone knows we're here." The small wooden church sat at the far end of town, paint peeling, cross slightly crooked on the steeple. The circuit preacher's wagon was still there, which many hadn't left yet. Good. Caleb dismounted and tied both horses to the rail. "You ready?" he asked. Lena took a breath. "No, but let's do it anyway." The church door creaked when Caleb pushed it open. Inside, the preacher was packing books into a trunk, humming tunelessly to himself. He was maybe 60, thin as a rail, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up when they entered. "Help you folks?" "We need to get married," Caleb said. No point dancing around it. The preacher blinked. "Right now?" "Right now, so—" "Well." He set down the book he'd been holding, studied them both. "That's direct. I appreciate direct. You got a license?" "We'll get one after. Right now we just need the ceremony." "Son, that's not how it works. Law requires—" I know what the law requires, Caleb interrupted. But there are men in this town who are going to try to stop this if we wait. So I'm asking, will you marry us now and we'll handle the paperwork later? The preacher looked at Lena. Miss, are you being coerced? No, she said firmly. This is my choice. You sure about that? Because once it's done, it's done. I'm sure. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I've seen enough forced marriages to know what they look like, and this ain't it. But I'll need a witness. Already thought of that, Caleb said. Give us 10 minutes. He left Lena in the church and crossed the street to the general store. Margaret was opening up, turning the sign from close to open. She saw him through the window and her eyebrows went up. Mr. Hayes, early for lamp oil. Need a favor? Must be a big one to bring you here at dawn. Biggest I'll probably ever ask. He glanced back at the church. I need you to witness a wedding. Margaret went still. Whose wedding? Mine. For maybe the first time since he'd known her, Margaret Ross looked genuinely surprised. Then a slow smile spread across her face. Well now, that's one way to solve a problem. You'll do it? Wouldn't miss it for the world. Give me 2 minutes to lock up. They walked back to the church together. Margaret didn't ask questions, which Caleb appreciated. Some things didn't need explaining. You either understood or you didn't. The preacher had cleared a small space near the altar when they returned. He'd put on his formal coat and found a worn Bible. Lena stood near the front pew, hands clasped together. She looked small in the morning light filtering through the dusty windows. Everyone here? The preacher asked. Everyone who needs to be, Caleb confirmed. Then let's begin. He opened the Bible, found his place. Normally I'd give a whole speech about the sanctity of marriage and the bonds of holy matrimony, but given the circumstances, I'll keep this short. He looked at Caleb. You got a ring? Caleb hadn't thought of that. Neither had Lena, based on the way her eyes widened slightly. Margaret sighed, pulled a thin gold band from her own finger. Belonged to my first husband. He was a good man, better than the other two. I think he'd approve of it going to someone who needs it more than I do. She pressed it into Caleb's palm. The metal was warm from her skin. I'll get it back to you, he said. Keep it. I got his memory. That's enough. The preacher cleared his throat. Right then. Caleb Hayes, do you take this woman as your lawful wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward? The words felt surreal. A month ago, Caleb had been alone, content in his isolation, certain he'd never stand in a church again. Now here he was, about to marry a woman he'd pulled from the mud, whose real name he'd only learned a few days ago. I do, he said. The preacher turned to Lena. Eliza Whitmore. Lena, she interrupted. My name is Lena. The preacher paused, then nodded. Lena, do you take this man as your lawful wedded husband to have and to hold from this day forward? She looked at Caleb, really looked at him, like she was seeing past all the walls and barricades to something underneath. Whatever she found there must have been enough because she straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. I do. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. The ring, son. Caleb took Lena's left hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. He slid the ring on. It was a little loose, but it stayed. She stared at it like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. You may kiss the bride, the preacher said, then added quickly, or not. Up to you folks. Caleb met Lena's eyes. A question passed between them. She gave the smallest nod. He leaned in and kissed her, brief, gentle, nothing more than a brush of lips. But something shifted in that moment, some line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. When he pulled back, Lena's cheeks were flushed. Well, Margaret said into the silence, that's done then. I'll sign as witness. The preacher produced a marriage certificate from somewhere in his trunk and filled it out in careful handwriting. Margaret signed her name with a flourish. Caleb and Lena signed below. You'll want to get this registered at the courthouse, the preacher said, handing the certificate to Caleb. Make it official in the eyes of the law. We will, Caleb lied. They both knew there was no time for that. They left the church together. Outside, the town was waking up properly now. More people on the street, wagons rolling past, the sound of hammering from the blacksmith's shop. Normal life, continuing without any awareness that something significant had just happened. "A breakfast at my place," Margaret announced. "You're both too skinny, and I won't have people saying I witnessed a wedding without feeding the couple." "We should get back," Caleb started. "Nonsense. You've got time for eggs and coffee. Besides, you need to be seen in town together. Let word spread the natural way. More believable that way." She had a point. They followed her to the small house behind the general store. Inside it was tidy and sparse, the home of someone who'd learned to live without excess. Margaret moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs into a pan, slicing bread, pouring coffee that was actually good. They ate in silence at first. Caleb kept glancing at Lena's hand, at the ring that now sat there. She caught him looking and gave a small, uncertain smile. "Strange, isn't it?" she said. "Which part?" "All of it." Margaret set down more bread. "You two will be fine. I've seen marriages start on worse foundations than trying to save someone's life." "Did yours?" Lena asked. "My first one did. Met Samuel when he pulled me out of a river. I'd fallen in trying to save my father's hat of all stupid things. Samuel jumped in after me, got me to shore, and 3 weeks later, we were married." She smiled at the memory. "Had 12 good years before the fever took him. Worth every moment." "And the other two?" Caleb asked. "Those were mistakes, but you learn from mistakes too." A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret frowned, set down her coffee, and went to answer it. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his side, but he'd left the rifle with the horses. Voices at the door, Margaret's and someone else's. Male, unfamiliar. Then Margaret came back, her face carefully neutral. "Man asking for you, Mr. Hayes. Says his name is Garrett." Lena went pale. Caleb stood slowly. "I'll talk to him outside." "Caleb," Lena started, "stay here." He walked to the door. Garrett was standing on the porch, impeccably dressed as always, a slight smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, visible on the street, were two of the hired guns Caleb had seen at the saloon. "Mr. Hayes," Garrett said pleasantly. "Didn't expect to see you in town so early. Had business." "I see. And would that business involve the young woman who's currently in Mrs. Ross's kitchen?" Caleb kept his face blank. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Please, Mr. Hayes, let's not insult each other's intelligence. I've been watching your cabin for 2 days, saw you both leave this morning. Followed at a distance. Saw you go into the church." The smile widened. "So let me ask directly, is that Eliza Whitmore in there?" "No." "No?" "That's my wife, Lena Hayes. We just got married." The smile froze on Garrett's face. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I see. How convenient." "Convenient or not, that's how it is. We got a certificate, a preacher's signature, and a legal witness, all above board. A marriage performed this morning, less than an hour ago." Garrett's voice was still pleasant, but something cold had crept into it. "You'll understand if Mr. Hale finds that suspicious. He can find it whatever he wants, doesn't change the facts. The facts are that Miss Whitmore signed a binding contract with Mr. Hale, a contract that predates this," he waved his hand dismissively, "hasty ceremony. A contract requiring her to marry him. Hard to do that when she's already married to someone else." Garrett studied him for a long moment. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hale is not a forgiving man." "I'll take my chances." "Will you? Because right now I could walk into that kitchen, show the sheriff the contract, and have Miss Whitmore removed from your custody within the hour. The law is very clear about fulfilling contractual obligations. The law is also clear about a man's rights to his wife. A marriage performed under duress for the explicit purpose of violating an existing contract. Do you really think that will stand up in court?" "Maybe, maybe not. But it'll take time to find out, months probably. And in the meantime, Lena stays with me as my legal wife." Caleb crossed his arms. "You want to drag this through the courts, be my guest. But you're going back to Victor Hale with failure either way." Garrett's pleasant mask slipped for just a second. Real anger flashed in his eyes before he controlled it. "You're protecting her." "I'm protecting my wife." "Why? What is she to you really? You can't have known her more than a few weeks." "That's my business. It's Mr. Hale's business. He's invested considerable resources in recovering his property." "She's not property," Caleb said, voice going hard. "She's a person, and she made her choice." A choice made under your influence. A choice made because she'd rather marry a stranger than go back to your boss. What does that tell you about the kind of man Victor Hale is? That landed. Garrett's jaw tightened. You're in over your head, Mr. Hayes. This isn't just about one woman. This is about respect, about honoring agreements, about the way business is conducted. Mr. Hale has a reputation to maintain. Then he should have maintained it by not sending men to murder everyone in that wagon. The words hung in the air between them. Garrett went very still. That's a serious accusation. Is it? 4 people shot in the back, wagon burned, and the only survivor happens to be the woman your boss was trying to force into marriage. Seems like a pattern to me. You have no proof. Don't need proof, just need enough people asking questions. Small towns love gossip, and murder's the kind of thing people remember. Garrett's hand moved toward his coat. The 2 hired guns behind him shifted their weight. Caleb didn't move, but he measured the distance between himself and the nearest gun, calculated his chances. The door opened behind him. Lena stepped out onto the porch. Don't, Caleb said without looking at her. I'm not hiding. She moved to stand beside him. When Garrett saw her face, something changed in his expression. Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Hayes, she corrected. Her voice was steady, despite the fear Caleb could feel radiating off her. And I'm not going with you. You signed a contract. I signed it under duress. My father's debts aren't my responsibility, and I won't be sold to pay them. The law disagrees. Then the law can take it up with my husband. She reached over and took Caleb's hand. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was firm. The gesture wasn't lost on Garrett. His eyes dropped to their joined hands, to the ring on her finger. This is temporary, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. You can't hide behind a fraudulent marriage forever. It's not fraudulent. It's legal and binding, and I chose it. Lena lifted her chin. Tell Victor Hale that I'd rather be married to a man who treats me like a human being than spend one day as his property. Garrett's face flushed. You're making a terrible mistake, both of you. Mr. Hale has resources you can't imagine. He has judges, sheriffs, politicians in his pocket. He can make your lives very difficult. He already killed 4 people trying to get me back, Lena said. How much more difficult can it get? You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I know Victor Hale. I know what he's capable of. I know he sent you here with threats and hired guns because that's how he solves problems. But I'm not a problem anymore. I'm a married woman, making my own choices. Margaret appeared in the doorway behind them. Everything all right out here? Fine, Caleb said. Mr. Garrett was just leaving. Garrett looked between the 3 of them, Caleb, Lena, and Margaret, standing together like a wall. His hand moved away from his coat. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, it is, Caleb replied. You can tell Victor Hale that Eliza Whitmore doesn't exist anymore. There's only Lena Hayes, and she's under my protection. He wants to challenge that. He knows where to find me. Garrett turned and walked away. The 2 hired guns followed. Caleb watched them go, his body tensed for violence that didn't come. When they disappeared around the corner, he finally let himself breathe. That went better than expected, Margaret said dryly. Lena's hand was still in Caleb's, gripping so hard it hurt. She was shaking. He turned to her. You okay? I just told Victor Hale's representative to go to hell. Yeah, you did. In public, where people can witness it. Yep. She started laughing, not hysterical laughter, real amusement mixed with disbelief. I'm either very brave or very stupid. Little of both, probably. Margaret put a hand on Lena's shoulder. That took courage, girl, real courage. Your mother would be proud. The laughter stopped. Lena's eyes went bright with tears. She blinked back. Thank you. For being our witness. For everything. You're welcome. Now get out of my house and go home. You've stirred up enough trouble for one morning. They collected their horses and rode out of town. Behind them, Caleb could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways. By noon, everyone in Ridgefield would know that Caleb Hayes had married that missing woman Garrett was looking for. By evening, the story would have spread to every ranch and homestead within 20 miles. Good. Let it spread. Let Victor Hale hear about it and know that his contract meant nothing anymore. They were halfway home when Lena finally spoke. What happens now? Now we wait. See if Garrett goes back to Denver or if he pushes harder. And if he pushes, then we push back. She was quiet for a while, processing. Then, That wasn't just paper back there, was it? What we did? No, it wasn't. We're actually married. We are. For real. For real. She looked down at the ring on her finger. This is the most insane thing I've ever done. Same. But it felt right. When I was standing there telling Garrett to leave, when I called myself your wife, it felt right. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Didn't trust himself to say anything, so he just kept riding. They reached the cabin an hour later. Everything looked normal, no signs of intrusion, animals calm in the corral. But Caleb checked anyway, walking the perimeter while Lena put the horses away. Old habits. Inside, Lena stood in the middle of the room like she was seeing it for the first time. This is my home now, she said wonderingly. Legally. Officially. Temporarily, Caleb reminded her. Until the threat passes. Right. Temporary. But she didn't sound convinced. The rest of the day passed in strange normalcy. They fell back into the routines they'd established over the past weeks. Caleb working outside, Lena helping where she could, meals prepared and eaten together. But something was different now. The air felt charged, weighted with the reality of what they'd done. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set. Neither had said much since returning from town. I should sleep out here tonight, Caleb said eventually. Give you the bed. We're married now. People will expect. I know what they'll expect. But this arrangement is for your protection, not... He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't make this more awkward than it already was. I'm not going to assume anything. Lena was quiet for a long moment. You're a good man, Caleb Hayes. Don't know about that. I do. She stood. But you're right. It's been a long day and I'm exhausted. I'll take the bed. Wake me if there's trouble. She went inside. Caleb sat with his rifle and watched the darkness deepen. The valley settled into night sounds, wind in the grass, coyotes singing to each other, the creek running over stones. He must have dozed off because he woke suddenly to the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving fast. Caleb was on his feet immediately, rifle up, eyes scanning the darkness. They came from the south, 5 riders, maybe 6, silhouetted against the starlight. They reined in about 50 yards from the cabin, just at the edge of rifle range. Hayes, a voice called out. Not Garrett, someone else. We know she's in there. Send her out and we'll leave peaceable. Caleb didn't answer. He heard movement behind him, Lena woken by the noise. Stay inside, he said without turning. Who is it? Hired guns. Garrett must have gone straight to the nearest town and rounded them up. The voice called again. You got 1 minute to think about it, Hayes. After that, we're coming in. Caleb's mind raced. 6 men, maybe more he couldn't see. 1 rifle, 1 woman who could barely shoot. The cabin was defensible, but not against those odds. Caleb, Lena whispered urgently, there's too many. You can't. I can, and I will. This is insane. Just let me talk to them. Maybe. No. But I said no. He looked back at her finally. I didn't marry you just to hand you over the first time someone showed up with threats. Get the spare rifle, load it. And if anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you shoot them. She started to argue, saw his face, and stopped. Moved to get the rifle instead. The voice called out again. Time's up, Hayes. Last chance. Caleb stepped off the porch into the open. Raised his voice so it carried across the distance. You want her. You go through me. A pause, then laughter from multiple directions. They'd spread out, circling the cabin. Smart. That's how you want to play it? 1 man against 6? If that's what it takes. More laughter, but nervous this time. Something about Caleb's stance, his voice, the absolute certainty with which he'd spoken, made them reconcile. Then a new voice cut through the night. That's enough. Everyone went still. Caleb's hands tightened on the rifle as the 7th rider emerged from the shadows. Even in the darkness, he could see this man was different, older, better dressed, sitting his horse with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Victor Hale. Had to be. Mr. Hayes, the man said, his voice cultured and calm. I think we should talk. Reasonable men can reach reasonable agreements. Nothing to talk about. I think there is. You have something that belongs to me. I'm prepared to compensate you generously for its return. She's not an it. She's my wife, And she's not for sale. Victor urged his horse forward a few steps. Caleb raised his rifle. Victor stopped. Your wife? Yes, I heard about that. Very clever, romantic even, but ultimately pointless. He reached into his coat, slowly showing his hands. I have a contract signed by her father, legal, binding. She belongs to me. She belongs to herself. That's not how the law sees it. Then maybe the law's wrong. Victor sighed, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. Mr. Hayes, I admire your principles. Truly. But you're fighting for a lost cause. Miss Whitmore signed. Mrs. Hayes, Lena's voice rang out from inside the cabin. She appeared in the doorway, rifle in her hands, aimed directly at Victor. My name is Mrs. Hayes, and I will never be yours. The hired guns shifted nervously. Victor held up a hand to stop them. Eliza, he said, and his voice changed, became softer, almost gentle. You're upset. I understand. The situation with your father's debts was unfortunate, but we can move past that. Come with me now and I'll forget this whole embarrassing incident. No. Be reasonable. You signed a contract. Under duress. Your father signed it. My father sold me to pay his gambling debts. That doesn't make it right. Right or wrong doesn't matter. What matters is the law, and the law is on my side. Lena's hands were shaking, but her aim didn't waver. Then I guess the law and I have a problem. Something flickered across Victor's face, anger finally breaking through the civilized veneer. You think you can defy me? You think this... He gestured at Caleb at the cabin. This changes anything? I own half this territory. One word from me and every lawman from here to Denver will be hunting you both. Let them hunt, Caleb said. Doesn't change the fact that she's made her choice. A choice made in fear and desperation, not legally binding. Neither was selling a human being to settle a debt, but here we are. The two men stared at each other across the darkness. Behind Victor, the hired guns were getting restless. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. A woman with a rifle and a man who wasn't backing down. Finally, Victor spoke. I could burn this cabin down around you. Kill you both. Make it look like a tragic accident. You could try, Caleb agreed. But the first shot fired, I put a bullet through your chest, and I don't miss at this range. Then we're at an impasse. No. We're at an ending. You ride away, leave us alone, and this is over. You push forward, people die. Maybe us, maybe you, probably both. That what you want? Victor sat very still, calculating, weighing options. Caleb could almost see him doing the math. What was one woman worth versus his life, his reputation, the exposure that would come from a gunfight that ended with bodies? This isn't over, Victor said finally. I'll take this to court. I'll use every legal means at my disposal. You do that. We'll be right here. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Victor pulled his reins, turned his horse. Let's go. The hired guns looked confused but followed. They rode out the way they came, disappearing into the darkness. Caleb kept his rifle raised until the hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn around. Lena was still in the doorway, still holding the rifle, tears streaming down her face. I did it, she whispered. I told him no. Yeah, you did. He came all the way from Denver and I told him no. The rifle started to slip from her hands. Caleb crossed the distance and caught it before it fell, set it aside. Lena was shaking hard now, reaction setting in. He steadied her with hands on her shoulders. You stood up to him, he said, in front of his men, in front of everyone. That took real courage. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. She let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, and then she was against him, face pressed to his chest, crying in earnest now. Caleb held her, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head, and let her fall apart. They stood like that for a long time. Eventually the crying slowed, then stopped. Lena pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. Sorry, I got your shirt wet. I've had worse things on it. He'll come back, with lawyers and warrants and... Maybe. Probably. But you bought yourself time, and you proved something tonight. What? That you're not property, that you won't be owned. He touched the ring on her finger. That you're capable of choosing your own path. She looked down at where their hands joined. This was supposed to be temporary. Just paper to keep me safe. I know. But it doesn't feel temporary. No, Caleb admitted. It doesn't. They stood in the doorway, the night settling quiet around them. Whatever came next, courts, threats, more violence, they'd face it together. That was the truth they'd both been avoiding since the moment in the church. This wasn't temporary. This was real. And somehow, standing there with Lena's hand in his and Victor Hale's threat fading into the distance, Caleb found he didn't mind. The days after Victor's visit settled into an uneasy rhythm. Caleb worked the land with one eye always on the horizon, rifle never far from reach. Lena moved through the cabin like someone learning to inhabit a new skin, making coffee without asking where things were kept, mending his shirts without being asked, standing beside him on the porch in the evenings like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't talk about what had happened between them, didn't discuss the way she'd pressed against him after Victor left, or how his hands had lingered on her back longer than necessary. Some things existed better in silence. A week passed, then 2. No riders appeared on the trail, no legal documents arrived. The world kept turning as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. It was Margaret who brought the news. She rode out on a Tuesday afternoon, her old mare plodding along at an unhurried pace. Caleb saw her coming from the corral and met her halfway. "Thought you didn't make house calls," he said. "I don't. This is special." She dismounted, handed him a folded newspaper. "Came in on yesterday's stage from Denver. Thought you'd want to see page 3. Caleb opened it, scanned the columns until he found what she meant. Prominent businessman Victor Hale arrested on multiple charges. He read the article twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Victor Hale, arrested. Federal marshals, not local law. Charges including fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the deaths of 4 people near Widow's Creek. Several associates also arrested. Investigation ongoing. "How?" Caleb asked. "Someone talked," Margaret said. "One of his hired men, apparently, decided a reduced sentence was worth more than loyalty. Once he started talking, others followed. Whole thing collapsed like a house of cards." Lena appeared on the porch, drawn by the voices. "What's happened?" Caleb handed her the newspaper, watched her face as she read, saw the color drain from her cheeks, then flood back in a rush. "He's arrested," she whispered. "Victor's actually arrested. Looks that way. But the contract, his lawyers, won't matter much if he's convicted of murder," Margaret said. "Hard to enforce a marriage contract from a federal prison. And even if he beats the charges, his reputation's destroyed. No judge will touch this case now, not with the attention it's getting." Lena read the article again, hands shaking. "It's over. It's actually over." "Seems so." She looked at Caleb, then at Margaret, then back at the newspaper. Then she started laughing. Real laughter, the kind that came from somewhere deep and genuine. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until she had to sit down on the porch steps to catch her breath. "I'm free," she said between gasps. "I'm actually free." Margaret smiled. "That you are, girl. Question is, what are you going to do with it?" The laughter stopped. Lena looked at Caleb, something complicated moving behind her eyes. "I don't know," she said quietly. Margaret cleared her throat. "Well, I'll leave you two to figure that out. Just wanted to bring the news." She mounted her mare with some difficulty. "Caleb, you take care. Lena, you're welcome in town anytime. Door's always open." She rode off before either of them could respond. Caleb and Lena stood in the yard, the newspaper between them like evidence of something neither wanted to acknowledge. "You could leave now," Caleb said finally. "If you wanted. Head to Montana, find your aunt. Start over somewhere nobody knows you." "I could." "No one would stop you." "No, they wouldn't." She folded the newspaper carefully, creasing the edges. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" The question hung in the afternoon air. Caleb thought about the cabin the way it had been before Lena, silent, empty, precisely ordered around the absence of another person. Then he thought about the way it felt now, with her presence woven into every corner. Coffee made the way she liked it. Books she'd borrowed from Margaret stacked by the bed. the sound of her humming while she worked. "No," he said. "That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" "I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want you to make a choice that's actually yours. Not because you're running from something or because you owe me anything. A real choice." Lena set the newspaper down on the porch rail. "What if I told you I already made it?" "When?" "The morning we got married, maybe before that." She crossed the distance between them. "I could have run a dozen times. Could have taken the gray mare and headed north while you were in town or working the far field, but I didn't. You were healing. I needed safety. You gave me that. But somewhere along the way, it became more than just safety." She gestured at the cabin, the valley, everything around them. "This place, this life, it feels right. You feel right." Caleb's throat was tight. "Lena, I know this wasn't supposed to be real. I know we did it for practical reasons, and we barely know each other, and it's probably crazy to even think—" She stopped, took a breath. "But I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. With you. If you'll have me." He looked at her, really looked at her. Saw the woman who demanded to live while bleeding in the mud, who'd learned to shoot even when her hands shook, who'd stood in a doorway with a rifle and told a powerful man he had no claim on her, who'd chosen courage over and over again, even when it would have been easier to surrender. "Yeah," he said, "I'll have you." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the pulse jumping in her throat. "So what does that mean, for us?" "Means we stop pretending this is temporary. Means we figure out how to actually be married instead of just legally married." "I don't know how to do that." "Me neither. We'll have to learn as we go." "That's terrifying." "Little bit." She reached up, touched his face. Her hand was warm against his cheek. "I'm glad it's you. I'm glad it was always you." Caleb covered her hand with his own. "Me too." They stood like that for a moment, the afternoon light turning everything gold. Then Lena rose on her toes and kissed him. Not like the brief touch in the church, but real and deep and full of promise. Caleb pulled her closer, one hand at her waist, the other cradling the back of her head, and kissed her back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lena laughed again. "What?" Caleb asked. "I married a stranger to escape a forced marriage, and somehow ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. Life's funny that way." "Funny's one word for it." She kissed him again, and this time neither of them pulled away quickly. The months that followed weren't easy. Learning to live with another person after years alone required adjustments Caleb hadn't anticipated. Lena had her own rhythms, her own way of doing things, her own moments when the past caught up with her, and she needed space to breathe through it. They argued about stupid things, how much wood to chop, whether to plant corn or beans, whose turn it was to deal with the temperamental mule. But they also laughed. They worked side by side in the garden, her hands in the soil beside his. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. She taught him the French words her mother had taught her. He showed her how to read the weather in the clouds. They built something together piece by piece, day by day. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in October, heavy and wet, covering the valley in white. Caleb woke to find Lena standing at the window, watching the flakes drift down. "You okay?" he asked. "I was thinking about the people in the wagon, Daniel and Marie and the others, wondering if they'd be happy about how things turned out." Caleb got out of bed, crossed to stand beside her. "I think they would be. They helped you because they believed you deserved a chance. You took that chance and made something of it. I wish I could thank them." "You are thanking them, by living the life they helped you get to." She leaned against him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Tell me something about Sarah," she said quietly. "Something happy." It still hurt to talk about his daughter, probably always would, but it hurt less now, like a wound that had finally started to heal properly. "She used to make up songs," he said. "Completely ridiculous songs about the horses and the chickens and whatever else caught her attention. She'd sing them at the top of her lungs while she worked, didn't care who heard. She sounds wonderful." She was. "Do you think she'd like me?" Caleb thought about that. "Yeah, I think she would. She liked people who spoke their mind. You would have gotten along." They stood together watching the snow fall, the past and present existing side by side without conflict for once. Spring arrived with a rush of green and a letter from Denver. It was addressed to Lena, forwarded through Margaret. She opened it at the kitchen table while Caleb made coffee. "It's from a lawyer," she said, scanning the pages. "Victor's been convicted. 15 years in federal prison. The contract is officially nullified." She kept reading. "My father passed away 3 months ago. Liver failure." Caleb watched her face, saw complicated emotions flicker across it. Grief, relief, anger, sadness, all mixed together. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not sure I am. Is that terrible?" "No, it's honest." She set the letter down. "He left debts. No estate to speak of. The lawyer wants to know if I'll claim the body. Will you?" "I don't know. He sold me, traded me like livestock to save himself, but he was still my father." She rubbed her eyes. "What would you do?" "Can't answer that. Everyone's relationship with their parents is different." In the end, she wrote back declining. "Let the county handle it," she said. She'd grieved the father he could have been, not the one he was. The letter also contained something else, a small inheritance from her mother's side of the family, held in trust and protected from her father's creditors. Not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. "We could expand," Lena said, studying the amount. "Buy more land, maybe some cattle, build a proper barn." "We could," Caleb agreed. "Or you could use it to go to Montana, start fresh like you originally planned." She gave him a look. "Why would I do that when I'm already home?" They used the money to improve the ranch, bought breeding stock, fixed the roof, added a room to the cabin. Lena worked as hard as any ranch hand, learning to rope and brand, to read cattle and anticipate weather. She was good at it, to Caleb's surprise, had a natural sense for the animals and the land. One evening in late spring, they sat on the newly expanded porch watching the sunset. Lena had dirt under her nails and hay in her hair. She looked content in a way she never had when she first arrived. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous pastime." She elbowed him. "Serious thought, about what Margaret said that day, about making our own choices." "Yeah? For so long, I let other people make decisions for me. My father chose where I lived, what I studied, who I'd marry. Even running away was just reacting to someone else's choice." She picked at a splinter on the porch rail. "But staying here, that was mine. Choosing you was mine. This life we're building is mine." "Ours," Caleb corrected gently. "Ours," she agreed. "But I chose it. Not because I had to, not because someone forced me, because I wanted to." "That's what freedom is," Caleb said. "Not just the absence of chains, the ability to choose your own path." "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old." "You're 34. That's not old. Feels old some days." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Well, you're stuck with me now, for better or worse, like the preacher said." "Could be worse. Could be better, too." "How so?" She sat up, met his eyes. "I want children. Eventually. If you do." The statement caught him off guard. He thought of Sarah, of the grave under the oak tree. Thought about the fear that came with loving someone who could be taken away. "I'm scared," he admitted, "of losing someone again." "I know, I'm scared too. Scared I'll be a terrible mother. Scared something will go wrong. Scared of 100 things." She took his hand. "But I'm more scared of letting fear stop me from living." Caleb looked out at the valley, at the land they'd worked together, at the life they'd built from nothing. Sarah would always be a part of him, a scar that never fully healed. But maybe that was okay. Maybe you could carry loss and still move forward. Maybe the scars proved you'd survived. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Yeah. Let's have kids. Eventually." She smiled, bright and genuine. "Eventually. But not right now." "No. Right now we're still figuring out how to be married." "How are we doing with that?" "Better than expected. You haven't scared me off yet." "Give it time." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "I've got plenty of time." "We both do." The summer brought visitors. Margaret came out regularly now, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just for conversation. Other neighbors started stopping by. Cautiously at first. Then more frequently as word spread that Caleb Hayes had a wife and wasn't quite as isolated as everyone thought. A family named Morrison settled on the land to the north. They had 3 children who were fascinated by everything about ranch life. Lena took to teaching them, the same way someone must have taught her once. How to read tracks, identify plants, move quietly through the brush. Caleb watched her with the kids and saw the mother she'd become someday. Patient but firm, willing to let them make mistakes, but quick to correct anything dangerous. The Morrison parents were grateful, invited them to dinner. It became a regular thing, Sunday meals, shared work parties, the kind of community Caleb had avoided for years. He was surprised to find he didn't mind it. One evening, after a particularly rowdy dinner at the Morrisons where the children had begged for stories about the frontier, Lena asked him about the war. "You never talk about it," she said. "Not really." They were riding home in the twilight, the horses moving at an easy walk. "Not much to say. It was bloody and pointless, and most of the men I knew didn't make it home." "But you did." "Yeah, I did." "Do you feel guilty about that?" He thought about it. "I did. For a long time. Felt like I should have done more, fought harder, saved more people. But you can't save everyone. You can barely save yourself most of the time." "Is that what you learned?" "Part of it. The other part is that surviving isn't enough. You have to actually live. Took me a long time to figure out the difference." Lena was quiet, processing that. "I think that's what I'm learning too. That surviving what Victor did to me, what happened to those people in the wagon, that's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Of whatever I choose to make it." She was right, Caleb realized. They'd both spent so long just surviving, him in his isolation, her in her fear, that they'd forgotten living was an option. But every day they worked together, ate together, built something together, they were choosing to live instead of just exist. That was worth more than all the safety in the world. 2 years after the morning in the church, Lena gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult. Margaret served as midwife, assisted by Mrs. Morrison. Caleb spent most of it pacing outside, unable to sit still, memories of another birth mixing with the present. When Margaret finally came out to tell him he had a healthy daughter and Lena was asking for him, he nearly collapsed with relief. Lena was exhausted, sweaty, and smiling wider than he'd ever seen. The baby was wrapped in a blanket Margaret had brought, tiny face scrunched against the light. "Meet your daughter," Lena said, offering the bundle. Caleb took her carefully, terrified he'd break something. The baby opened her eyes, dark blue, unfocused, and made a small sound. "She's perfect," he said. "She's loud. You'll learn that soon enough." But Lena's voice was full of joy. "What should we name her?" They discussed it before but never settled on anything. Caleb looked at his daughter, thought about circles and time and the way life moved forward even when you thought it couldn't. "What about Hope?" he suggested. "It's what she represents." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Hope. I like that. Hope Hayes. Works." She reached out, touched his arm. Sarah would have been a wonderful big sister. The grief was still there, would always be there. But it didn't overwhelm him like it once had. Yeah, she would have. They sat together, new family taking shape around them, and watched their daughter sleep. Outside, the sun was setting over the valley, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Another day ending, another beginning. The years passed in the way they do on a working ranch, measured in seasons and harvests, in children growing and cattle multiplying, in roofs repaired and fences mended. Hope grew into a wild, fearless child who reminded Caleb so much of Sarah it hurt sometimes. But it was a good hurt, the kind that meant he was healing instead of just hiding. When Hope was 3, Lena got pregnant again. A boy this time, born during a spring snowstorm. They named him Daniel, after the wagon driver who died protecting Lena. It seemed right to honor those who'd given their lives so she could have hers. The ranch prospered, not wealthy by any means, but stable, comfortable. They had enough land to support a decent herd, enough hands to help during busy seasons. The cabin expanded twice more, growing from 1 room to 4, from a shelter to a home. Margaret grew older, but stayed sharp. She continued running the general store until her joints wouldn't cooperate anymore, then sold it to a young couple from back east, and moved into a small house Caleb and Lena built on their land. She lived there for 5 more years, spending her days watching the grandchildren, as she called Hope and Daniel, and telling stories about the old days. When she passed, it was peaceful, in her sleep, in the house her friends had built for her. They buried her next to Sarah under the oak tree that had become a small family cemetery. She'd like that, Lena said at the funeral. Being close to Sarah? She always said that little girl had spirit. Yeah, Caleb agreed. She did. The Morrison family stayed, grew. Their children grew up alongside Hope and Daniel. More families moved into the valley, drawn by stories of good land and fair people. A proper town started to form around what had been just a few scattered homesteads. They called it Hayes Valley, though Caleb protested the name. Wasn't my valley, he said. Was here before me. But you made it a place people wanted to come to, Lena pointed out. You and Margaret and the others who chose community over isolation. He couldn't argue with that. One spring, when Hope was 15 and Daniel was 12, a young woman showed up at the ranch. She was dirty, scared, and running from a man who'd bought her father's debts. She'd heard stories about a woman named Lena Hayes who'd once been in a similar situation and gotten free. Lena took her in without hesitation. We'll figure it out, she told the girl. Same way I did, one step at a time. Caleb watched his wife work, talking to lawyers, organizing community support, making sure the girl understood she had choices. It was like watching history repeat, but better this time, because Lena knew what she was doing, knew how to fight these battles. The girl's contract was dissolved within 6 months. Legal precedent had shifted, partly because of Victor Hale's case, partly because enough people had started pushing back against the practice of treating women as property. The girl stayed on as a ranch hand for 2 years before heading to California to start fresh. She wasn't the last. Over the years, other women found their way to Hayes Valley, drawn by stories of a place where a woman could choose her own path. Lena helped all of them, sometimes with money, sometimes with legal advice, sometimes just with a place to stay while they figured out their next move. You're building something bigger than a ranch, Caleb told her one evening, watching her work on correspondence with a lawyer in Denver. I'm just doing what someone did for me, paying it forward. It's more than that. You're changing things. She looked up at him. We're changing things. You think I could do any of this without you? Yeah, I do. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I'm also smart enough to know I don't have to do it alone. She was right. That was the real lesson, the one they'd both learned slowly over the years. Strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to lean on others, when to ask for help, when to build something together instead of trying to do it all yourself. Caleb grew old gracefully. His hair went gray, then white. His hands developed the kind of ache that came from decades of hard work. But he stayed strong, kept working the land alongside his children and grandchildren. Yes, grandchildren, because Hope had married a young rancher from the next valley and given them 2 grandchildren of their own. Lena aged 2, though she fought it every step of the way, complained about the wrinkles around her eyes, the way her back hurt after a long day. But she was still beautiful to Caleb. Still the woman who demanded to live in the mud, who'd chosen courage over comfort. One evening, 40 years after that morning in the church, they sat on the porch of the house they'd built together. 4 generations of family were scattered around the property, Hope and her husband working in the barn, Daniel riding the fence line with his oldest son, the younger grandchildren playing in the yard. Did you ever think we'd end up here? Lena asked. When you pulled me out of that wagon wreck. Honestly? No. Thought you'd heal up and leave and I'd go back to being alone. But you didn't want that. Even then. Didn't know what I wanted. Just knew I couldn't let you die. Best decision you ever made. Marrying you was the best decision. She smiled, reached over to take his hand. Her fingers were spotted with age now, the ring Margaret had given them worn smooth from decades of wear. But her grip was still strong. I used to think freedom meant being alone, she said. No obligations, no one controlling me. But that's not freedom. That's just another kind of prison. What's freedom then? Choosing who you want to be with. Choosing the life you want to build. Choosing to stay even when leaving would be easier. She looked at him. You gave me that choice. Every day for 40 years, you gave me that choice. You gave it to me too. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over Hayes Valley. The land they'd worked, the family they'd built, the community they'd helped create. All of it had started with one choice in the mud, One man who decided to stop instead of riding past. One woman who demanded to survive. Everything that came after was just the consequence of that choice, rippling outward in ways neither of them could have predicted. Caleb thought about the lessons embedded in their story, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to be vulnerable with another person, about how freedom isn't the absence of commitment, it's the ability to choose your commitments, about how healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, but learning to carry it without letting it crush you. He thought about Sarah buried under the oak tree and how he'd thought his life was over when she died, how he'd built walls around himself and called it survival. And he thought about how Lena had cracked those walls without even trying, just by being herself, by needing him and letting him need her back. Love, real love, wasn't about perfection or smooth sailing. It was about two imperfect people choosing each other over and over, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You made choices. Good ones." "We made choices." "Yeah, we did." As the stars came out and the grandchildren were called in for dinner, Caleb realized something fundamental. The story people would tell about them, about the woman who escaped a forced marriage and the man who helped her, that wasn't really the story at all. The real story was simpler and more complicated at the same time. It was about learning that you don't have to face everything alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that the people who matter aren't the ones who try to own you, but the ones who give you space to become yourself. It was about understanding that survival is just the beginning. The hard part, the important part, is what you do with the life you've fought for. Do you hide from it, protect yourself so carefully that you never really live? Or do you take risks, open yourself to hurt, choose connection even knowing it might not last? Caleb and Lena had chosen connection, chosen risk, chosen each other every day for 40 years, and that choice had built something bigger than either of them alone, a family, a community, a legacy of freedom and choice that would outlast them both. The women who came to Hayes Valley looking for help would tell their daughters about Lena Hayes, and those daughters would tell their daughters. The story would change with each telling, would grow and shift until it was more legend than truth. But the core would remain, a woman who refused to be property, a man who helped her claim her freedom, and the life they built together through courage and choice. That was the real inheritance, not the land or the cattle or the money. The knowledge that freedom is something you create through action, through choosing and choosing again, through building a life that honors your own truth. "Come on," Lena said, standing and offering her hand. "Let's go have dinner with our family." Caleb took her hand and stood. His joints protested, but he ignored them. There'd be time to rest later. Right now, there was life to be lived. They walked into the house together, into the warmth and noise and chaos of a family dinner. 4 generations gathered around a table that had been built with their own hands, in a house that had grown from one room to many, on land that had been wilderness and was now home. Outside, the valley settled into night. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the promise of morning. And under the oak tree, 2 graves rested in peace. Sarah Hayes and Margaret Ross, watching over the family that had grown from grief and choice and stubborn hope. The story that had started with blood and mud and desperate survival had ended with love and legacy and the simple truth that we are all free to choose our own paths. We just have to be brave enough to take the first step. And Caleb Hayes, who'd once been a man too broken to believe in anything, and Lena Hayes, who'd once been a woman sold like property, had taken that step together and built a world where others could do the same. That was enough. That was everything.